Welcome everyone to Weekend Escapades. Today's adventure takes us to Mountain Meadows Massacre site. Now this happened on September 7th through the 11th of 1857, and it was a series of attacks that resulted in the mass murder of over 120 members of the Baker-Fancher Immigrant wagon train. Now this massacre occurred in southern Utah Territory at Mountain Meadows. This attack was perpetrated by the Mormon militia together with the Southern Paiute Native Americans. Before we dive in, be sure you like and subscribe for more like this as it keeps our channel strong. Now this wagon train was made up of mostly families from Arkansas, and it was bound for California. They traveled the old Spanish Trail and passed through the territory. So let's take a look and continue with the rest of the history at this location. Now, as this wagon train headed west, there were rumors about the party's behavior towards Mormons, and war hysteria towards outsiders was rampant in the Utah Territory. While the immigrants were camped, local militia leaders, including John D. Lee, made plans to attack the wagon train. The leaders of the militia wanted to give the impression of tribal hostilities, so they persuaded Southern Paiutes to join in with a large party of militia disguised as Native Americans, and they began the attack. We are here at the Mountain Meadows Massacre site, location number 4. This is where the memorial is for the women and children and the wounded. In honored remembrance, may we forever remember the women, children, and wounded who died here on September 11th, 1857. As part of the Mountain Meadows Massacre, they were killed without just cause. Most lie in unmarked graves somewhere in this valley. Only 17 small children survived. They were later reunited with their extended families in Arkansas. This is the site by the Women's and Children and Wounded Memorial Site, where they were placed on wagons and brought to this area. And then, of course, after execution, they were placed in the ground after they were stripped of their clothing to, of course, hide the evidence, evidently, is what I was reading and told about. So they were put in this area, and they were, again, found sometime after that and laid to rest in the memorial site. So here we are at site number 3. This is the memorial to the men and the boys that were here and what happened at this location. As you can see here, each one of them have a Mountain Meadows Massacre Site National Historic Landmarker explaining the locations and what all the monuments here were. This was not necessarily one of the best representations of the Mormon militia. So never to be forgotten, again, in memory of the immigrant men and boys from Arkansas massacred here in Mountain Meadows on September 11th, 1857. Their lives were taken prematurely and wrongly by Mormon militiamen. In one of the most tragic episodes in Western American history. May we forever remember and honor those buried in this valley. May we never forget this tragedy, but learn from the past. Very touching and very hard to read those words on these placards here on the Mountain Meadows Massacre site. Now, there were many men involved in this massacre, but the one man that was brought to trial 17 years later was John D. Lee, shown here. He was found guilty and executed at the location where this massacre happened. So he was considered a fall guy or a patsy for the church, as there was many more involved, and here he is sitting on top of his casket moments before the firing squad executed him. Initially, John D. Lee incorporated the Paiute Indians to attack the settlers, and after about 4 days of that attack, they lost a significant amount of the tribe. So what happened then is the job was not done. John D. Lee got the Mormon militia to move in, get the settlers to surrender with a flag of truce, and when they did that, they went ahead and took the settlers, separated them to each one of these locations, and that's when the execution of those settlers began. I'm going to continue to walk on up here, but throughout here, you'll see that all the way down there, you might be able to see an American flag waving. That is the memorial site right down there. So this is the Overlook, and the Overlook has got things that you can look through here. Of course, I'm going to call these not spyglasses, but simple tubes that you can look through, and it'll show you the exact location of each one of the sites. Here's a memorial here, now that we've got to the top, in Memoriam, in the valley below between September 7th and 11th, 1857. A company of more than 120 Arkansans, immigrants led by Captain John T. Baker and Captain Alexander Fancher, was attacked while en route to California. This event is known in history as the Mountain Meadow Massacre. And all of these names on the wall are the individuals that lost their lives. As you can see here through this one, when you look through, that is the location of the women's, children, and wounded. And through this one, as you look through, that is where we're seeing the men and boy memorial where they lost their lives. Over there, where they have the memorial, this is the site. It shows you exactly where that was. And this is the Immigrant campsite where this all began, where the fight started. Okay, so behind us is where the site was, where we were. That's the Overlook site that shows you the markers where this incident happened in 2 locations. And then now we are here at the burial site where they found all the victims from this horrific event and placed them behind me. As you can see there, there's a flag and so forth flying in the background. We're going to take a closer look at that burial site. Okay, so this site here, the burial site, has a nice paved path, and we're going to take off down here. And there's also a little path that goes around with some other markers and things. And you can see off in the distance there is the burial site. You can see the large mound of rocks that are there, and we'll show you that in detail here in a second. And here's that memorial site. It's all fenced off and gated. And around the inside exterior walls are all of the stones, headstones, in memorial of all the families and people, of course, that lost their lives here at this location. So this is site 2, the memorial site. One of the things at this location, this is where the actual members of the Arkansas wagon train set up camp on Saturday, September 5th, 1857. And on Sunday, they likely rested and gathered for a Christian worship service. And after that is when the attacks happened, and ultimately they're buried here at the same site that they were camped on with their 200 head of cattle and some oxen and their families traveling to California for a better life. Now, all these headstones that are placed here are placed not necessarily with the victims from this tragic event. They're placed here. Some of the bodies are located, and most, or a lot of them, are still in the meadows around this area. The bodies are still there. So this is in memoriam of that, as you can see. But all of these plots we'll kind of take a little view of, but whole families were lost here. A tremendous amount of family members for a few separate families. All of these stones here along this outside wall are for the Miller and Cameron families. And again, the ages are as old as 51 and as young as 9. Now this is the trail that takes off from the memorial. It goes on up the hill here a little bit, and it is the siege trail. So we're going to read some of the markers that goes around here, because this is where the actual siege happened, where some of the militiamen and some of the Native Americans attacked the wagon train that they had, and I believe 10 members at that point lost their lives, and that is when they surrendered. And when they surrendered, that is when they separated the group of men, women, children, and wounded, and then that is when they initiated the individual execution and massacre of those pioneers. So this would be the high ground here where the militia would have been, and this is where the attack would have happened. So right down here, there's a beacon there, or a marker I should say, that we're going to show you. And then also down here is where that meadow would be, where they were camped, and the memorial off to the right. But this is where the 200 head of cattle, the wagon trains, the oxen that were pulling those wagons would be when they were being attacked. So coming from surrounded in the high ground and being attacked down there by the meadow. So here's the marker that we were talking about, and as it reads, ever remembered in honor of those who rest in this field. They were innocent and died in unjust attacks that began on September 7th, 1857. They were defending their friends and families who buried them before leaving the protection of their camp. To the other victims of the Mountain Meadows Massacre who lie in unknown graves, rest in peace and be assured you are remembered. You know, some of these are very tough to read, as I'm not real emotional, but I guess I am, because when you stand out here and see all of this and what has happened here and all the lives that were lost in an unjust manner, it is a little bit heart-wrenching. Okay, so you can see the foothills there where the attackers were attacking the wagon train that was circled here in this meadow. And then what would happen is eventually they were starved out over time and mostly dehydrated with no water, because there was a creek that is right down here. Here's where the creek would have been located. But while under fire, under attack, the men would have to try to break free from the wagon train in this meadow and go across and get water for the survival. And so it was very tough without them being shot by the militia. Now, this is a very sad story, and when you look up research and some readings on this story, it can take you down a rabbit hole with who's responsible and what happened during this time. Now, after a trial, only one man was brought to be found guilty. That was John D. Lee. He was brought to trial and convicted, and he was executed by firing squad very near this location. Now, that placard represents that. This is the last marker that we have at the site, and of course the last marker does show that he was put to trial and executed here by firing squad. And that will conclude our visit to Mountain Meadows Massacre site. And until our next adventure, goodbye from Weekend Escapades.